Yo, y'all, this was Happy 7, and today I'm going to be doing a tier list video. Yes, I know it's a bit of a meme. However, um, this is something that I wanted to do for Honor in the realisticness and effectiveness of the weapons of the characters for a couple of reasons. So, a while ago, I think maybe a week or so, the YouTuber Tony, who is wildly more popular than me, but anyway, he did a video on like a weapons tier list for Honor, although it was on the uniqueness of the weapons as far as video games went. And this one is going to be in their realisticness and effectivity in one-on-one combat. Because that's, I would say, primarily what this game is. Is one-on-one combat. And because so often I just love to point out the ridiculousness in a lot of these character designs as far as realism goes. So anyways, what I'll be looking through here is almost entirely on the weapons and, you know, how that might affect combat and their strengths and weaknesses and such. And of course, I'll be explaining why I'm rating them how I am. And if it comes down to a like a tie between a couple characters, or I'm giving the exact same pros and cons for a character but rate them higher or lower than the other one, then I'll look at things like armor and stuff like that. But it's pretty primarily going to be focused on weapons. So, starting with S tier, we have the Warlord. Now, the Warlord's weapons is a broadsword and a round shield. Now, these two weapons were probably some of the most used by like everyday people as far as Vikings went. I mean, a sword and a shield in so many different medieval cultures. In pretty much every single army, you could find footmen who had a sword and a shield. And why? Because it was the most effective. A broadsword was nice because you can hack and slash with it, and if you need to, you can stab with it pretty easily. And a round shield is nice because it can protect so much of your body if need be, and if you have to or can, you can use it as a weapon to shove or bash people away. And because of these reasons, the broadsword isn't particularly heavy compared to like a longsword or a greatsword, so it's extremely easy to it's good to wield, but it's not so short that it's like a dagger or a short sword. And the shield itself is strong and sturdy enough that it can withstand blow after blow after blow, but at the same time not so absolutely heavy that it'll slow you down in combat. And so for those reasons, I'm going to drag the Warlord over here, and he will be the first in S tier. So, yeah. So next up, we have the Blackfriar. So the Blackfriar's weapons are extremely similar to the Warlord's, a sword and a shield, except this one is a long sword and a kite shield, like kind of like a tower kite shield almost. As you can see on him, it's very large. And for pretty much exactly the same reasons as the Warlord, I'm rating these weapons as an S tier. Like, I'm rating them S tier for the character. And these specific... so something that confused me a bit is, for a couple of these weapons, I was looking up the names specifically for the samurai, because a lot of their weapons names are more complex than just like club or sword or something like that. So, but when I was looking them up for the Blackfriar to make sure I was getting the names right for kite shield and longsword, that's what confused me, is the longsword part of it, because in both the trailer for the Prior and for the Warden, they call it a longsword, but the Warden's longsword is a lot longer than the longsword of the Blackfriar. So I guess it's a longsword. It looks more like a short sword to me, but I don't really know. I mean, maybe it's just how it looks in that specific in the specific screen. but it definitely is a lot smaller than the Warden's longsword. But anyways, as far as these go, the kite shield is used a lot less offensively than a round shield, but can still be used pretty offensively. But the absolute size of it makes it so that if you need to take cover, you can basically just crouch down and you're good from any blow from directly in front of you. And if you're strong enough to bash around with a kite shield, then you can, I mean, you can pack quite the punch with something like that. Not to mention, after a good hit with that shield, you could follow through with a strike from the sword, which is exactly what the Tenebrous Rising followed with a light attack is within the game. And in a mixture of defense and semi-quick combat, from that I am also putting the Blackfriar at S tier, who is right here. All right. So next up, I am going to be doing the Valkyrie. Now, I'm going to start right off by saying the Valkyrie's design is absolutely ridiculous as far as armor goes, with almost all of her arm being visible and super easy to get to. That's stupid. All right, now that we got that out of the way, this is another extremely commonly used, or was, I suppose, an extremely commonly used duo, a spear and a shield, and is even older than the sword shield, since, naturally spears are way easier to make. This is a small shield, so not quite as big as the quite as big as the Warlords. So it wasn't used for bashing quite as much, but you still maintained a sense of defense as well as having a spear. Whereas, if you just had the spear, you could be, you could impale somebody, for example, where you probably couldn't really get through somebody's armor and impale them all the way with just one hand. However, with the shield, you still have the ability to jump back and have the shield as a block, or if somebody came from you from the side while you were fighting somebody, you could still turn around and use that shield instead of just be completely doomed, since you only have a spear. And the spear is nice because you can keep a much longer distance from somebody with a spear, whereas if they just had a short sword or a broadsword. And if they had a long sword or a great sword or a claymore or something like that, then you would be way faster than them, regardless of the fact that they could hit you just as easily as you could hit them. So, and that's pretty much it. So that's why I'm putting the Valkyrie in S tier. Let's see. Oh, there you are. Bop. Okay, and that'll do it for S tier. So, the next tier is A, and A is basically, I guess I didn't really explain S very much, but S was basically about as good as you can get. I mean, S was, combinations that were just pretty solid, like extremely difficult to get through if you aren't also an S tier. So yeah. A tier will be more like almost unstoppable in the way that, it would be really difficult to get through to somebody who is using the weapons that I have placed for S tier. However, it would be easy enough for somebody in A or S tier. And there are little things here and there that would decrease the effectivity of the weapons that they were using. So the first in A tier will be the Conqueror. Now the Conqueror, oops, I didn't actually even click on the hero. So the Conqueror's weapons, just like the past three, is a weapon and a shield. So this is a light shield, which is basically just a smaller kite shield version of like a smaller version of the Blackfriars, and a flail or ball and chain. So the reason that this is A instead of S is because specifically the flail. because it's a really, really difficult weapon to use effectively because it's so easy to hit yourself with it. Whereas with a spear or a sword, you're not going to hit yourself with that unless somebody forces it back into you. So while the flail can be used really nicely because a lot of times a flail was good because if somebody blocked your attack, then the end would just whip around their shield and hit them anyways. Not to mention the momentum that you can bring up on a flail is vastly more than anything that you could do with a sword or a spear. But again, there's just such a high chance that you could hit yourself or get it tangled up in somebody else's weapon or something like that on accident, effectively incapacitating you from harming them. But because of the shield itself and how easy it could be to, just like with the Valkyrie or the Warlord, to block an incoming attack from the side or something like that, and just to keep you guarded in the front if need be, then, it's a bit higher than B, but not quite S. So, let me see. I can't find the Conqueror. There he is. So, yeah, that'll be first for the A tier. Okay, next up for the A tier is the Orochi. And this is the first couple of weapons, or not couple of weapons, but weapon choice that doesn't actually have any shield to go along with it. So the Orochi just has a pretty standard katana. It's not a very safe weapon to use, not because you might hit yourself with it like the Conqueror's flail, but mostly because katanas were really easy to break, unlike most European swords. Also, the Orochi doesn't actually have a shield, so if somebody comes in from the right or left or behind them, that's probably it. However, because of the speed and the agility of something like a katana and how fast you can move it around and how you could relentlessly swing over and over and over again in just a flurry of motions, you can stop somebody from attacking you by just never letting up. So while I think, and I said I would do the tier list primarily for one-on-one combat, and in one-on-one combat, this would definitely be an effective method. However, because of the lack of a shield or any protection besides dodging and focusing on the fact that you have a speed advantage against the other person, it's going in A. And also for the fact that if it wasn't a one-on-one or somebody else came along, you're probably fucked. So, yeah. So, here we go. The Orochi in A tier. The next one is the Nabooshe, which is almost exactly the same as the Orochi, except he has two katanas instead. So these are a little shorter than the Orochis, but understandably so, because otherwise the speed might be lost. So I think it would be a bit easier to block with two katanas instead of just one. So there's that added advantage. However, there's also a disadvantage of being kind of clumsy. So you can't really use two hands to do a heavier attack like you can with the Orochi. You can swing with both weapons, but they're only going to do the amount of harm that swinging it with one hand would do. So I don't think that you could hit as hard, but I think that you could have a matched speed and arguably more defense. And if somebody else comes in, now you have a sidearm at least that you can try to fend them off with, and somebody else at the same time. So because it's not really sacrificing anything, and any small thing that is a downside is replaced by the defensive position of having two, the Nabooshe is also an A tier character, I would say. So, bop. All right, and that's it for A tier. So, while A tier was almost perfect, but not quite hard to, not quite impossible to fight as S, unless you're another S tier. B is more like you have a chance of winning. You have a solid stance on victory, and depending on your skill, you may you might be able to actually win it if it's a higher tier or even an equal tier class. But not quite so bad that you could probably bet on losing this fight unless you have some amazing plan or some backup or something. So B is basically average. So first for B tier, we have the Centurion. So the Centurion is similar to the Orochi in the fact that they have one weapon, one sword, one-handed weapon, and no shield. So the Centurion has a gladius, which is it's kind of a mix between a short sword and a broadsword. So the gladius is nice because it, just like the Warlord's broadsword, has a good stabbing and slashing. But something that it has that the Warlord's doesn't is the speed. So the gladius can be really, really fast if used unrelentingly. Just the same as the Orochis. It's just the problem is it's still considerably thicker. I don't know if you can see the edge of it. For some reason, it won't let me rotate. It hasn't let me rotate the weapon since the update for Season 10. But anyways, unless they changed it to like arrow keys or... No, I guess not. Anyways, but yeah, it's a lot thicker, so it's not quite as fast. And this is one of those points where I'm comparing the Orochi and the Centurion, and they are almost exactly the same, so I'm falling to other smaller details like that. Another thing is that the Orochi's katana was noticeably longer, not by any massive amount, but it was definitely longer than the Centurion's, so it has a better reach. Not to mention, if the Centurion is going for stabbing, it's not necessarily faster than a slash from the Orochi. Another thing is the armor, and this is just one of few times that I'll focus on the armor. The Orochi's armor is pretty much totally leather and wood, which, adds on to that speed, while the Centurion's is metal, making him way slower. More protected, definitely, but also slower. And because of that reduced speed, I think that the Centurion is almost a B tier, but not quite. I mean, sorry, almost to A tier, but not quite. And so they are in B tier. Yeah. So the next that we will be doing in B tier is the Warden. So the Warden's weapon is apparently a longsword, but like I said before, it's a lot longer than the Blackfriars' so-called longsword. But anyways, and so I almost feel like calling it a great sword, because it definitely looks like a great sword if the if the Blackfriars is a longsword. But for the sake of what it's called, as far as the wiki is concerned, it's a longsword. So, the Warden has a two-handed longsword. Now, this immediately... I'm sorry, that's not what I meant to do. This immediately has the issue of being extremely slow. To have to take the time to reach the sword back for a swing and actually swing it, and hope that your opponent doesn't see it coming or they're not fast enough to get out of the way. However, because of its size, it can pretty easily be used for blocking as a sort of partial substitute for a shield. Definitely not nearly as good or effective as a shield, but it can be used for blocking better than any other weapon like the katanas or the gladius could. Another thing about it is, while you would possibly have to hit somebody several times and get a few good hits in with katanas or the gladius, with a longsword, you hit somebody hard enough around the head or in a vital area, and that's it. They're done. If they don't have the armor to withstand it. So while it is definitely slower and does not have the speed attribute to it, there's little chance that you're surviving, a hit from this. Even if you do survive a hit from this, the blow could, put you into enough shock that it would be difficult enough for you to recover before the next swing comes in. And because of that, I think that the Warden is in B tier. So, there he goes. Okay. So, next up we have the Nabooshe. So the Nabooshe has a Japanese polearm called the Nagita, I think. Let me see. Yes. So I don't know nearly as much about this weapon as I do about the other ones that I've covered, but from how it's used in the game and just from how it looks in general, it looks like it was like a slashing spear rather than a stabbing one like the Valkyries. It could obviously be used to stab, but it looks like a knife, like a long knife on the end of a staff. So this has the same like blocking capability that I was talking about with the Warden, I think, where it would be really easy to use this as a substitute for a shield. And again, not nearly as good as a shield, but if need be, could be used like one. So as far as the slashing end goes, excuse me, that could be used for some pretty devastating hits if reared all the way back, and if you're close enough to the enemy. Another thing is, with the size of it, it still retains a lot of speed that something like a longsword doesn't. And if you know that you're outmatched, you can keep a good distance and just stab instead. However, it does have the obvious downsides, such as being without a shield, and also not having nearly the weight of an impact as the Wardens, but still an extremely versatile weapon, regardless of its ineffectivity in close quarters combat. So because of that, I think that the Nabooshe is in B tier. So, there you go. Next up, we have the new Shia. So, new Shia's weapons are very odd. So the new Shia has dual hook swords, or gosh, I feel like that they had a name that wasn't just hook swords. If they do, I'm sorry, I don't remember it. But basically, I think that this falls under most of the same principles as the Aramusha. The difference is that these are a lot thicker than katanas and a bit unwieldy, to be honest, with a heavy guard in front of the handle, a spike at the bottom, and that curved blade. And so because of that, you really can't use it for stabbing unless you're really close to your opponent. And I think that the hooks would come in handy if you're extremely confident and know that you have the upper hand, or if you can safely assume that they're going to make an attack in a certain direction. It could be useful for disarming somebody, but if done incorrectly, you could hurt yourself more or put yourself in a worse position than your opponent. As far as defensive capabilities go, it's about the same as the Aramushes, I'd say, because while it does have those guards in front and it is thicker than a katana, definitely, like I said, it's really unwieldy. And if you're focusing on multiple people at once, they could hook their weapon around your hook and twist and take your sword. So, similar to the Nabooshe, I think that it's B tier because of the extreme versatility and massive amount of things that you can do with it, and many situations that would be useful to have swords like these. But because of how unwieldy they could be, and because of their weight, I think that it doesn't quite go under A. So there's an Usha. Bop. Actually, I can move you over a little bit. There we go. Okay. Let's see. Next up, we have the Kensei. Oops. That's the second loadout. All right, there we go. Anyways, so the Kensei has a really large katana called a Nodachi. So the Nodachi is just effectively a twice the size larger version of the Orochi's katana. This was primarily used just to take down horses or people on horses, and were not really used in one-on-one combat a whole lot. However, there were definitely warriors who used these in close quarters situations. Not many, and you had to be extremely skilled to do so. However, it could be done. I think this is B tier because it's got the speed and the hard hitting aspects of it. Because you could swing this as fast as a katana, but have the impacts of something like a longsword. So you could have several absolutely devastating strikes with this weapon multiple times in a row, and rid an enemy very fast. However, it's a very long katana, and because of how brittle a lot of katanas are, and Asian swords in general, it could really easily be shattered. And if your weapon breaks in battle, that's just sort of it. Or, there's a higher chance of it being the end. So, yeah, because of those, I think that the Kensei is within B tier. So let's see. There he is. All right. Next up, we have the Hitakiri, which is the newest addition to For Honor. So the Hitakiri's weapon is really strange. It's a type of Japanese axe called a masakari. In reality, the masakari was not double-headed like this. It only had one head, because otherwise it starts to make it difficultly heavy, and also can sometimes be bad for the user because it's a lot easier to hit yourself with a double-ended weapon, especially an axe. So, because of how thin the blades are, though, despite its size, it still retains a lot of speed, and because of the width of the interior over here, before it's closer to the handle before it reaches the blade, it can be used like a shield a lot more than something like a sword or a staff could. However, because of its size, it could definitely be really slow. And also, it's an axe, and axes can get stuck really easily compared to something like a sword, or definitely a spear. So because of the high chance of, just like with the Conqueror, because of the high chance of this weapon failing in doing what you want it to, but the effectivity of how hard it could hit and how fast it can hit hard, I think that it's B tier. So let's see, where is the Hitakiri? There you are. Oh, I'm running out of room. Oh, well, that's actually not bad, because this is the last for B tier. So, on to C tier. So, C tier basically is, if you have a weapon like this and you're going into one-on-one combat, unless you're extremely skilled with the weapon that you're using, you're probably not gonna win this. These are weapons that can be used effectively when there's other people around, or if you're an absolute badass with this weapon. But as far as just an average person using this weapon goes, they probably would not succeed in using it effectively. So, the first that I have in C tier is Shinobi. So the Shinobi's weapons are two hooks on the ends of chains called a kusar. It's hard to pronounce. Kusarigama. Kusarigama. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But anyways, the Kusarigama, like the Nadachi, were pretty rarely used. Although, the Nadachi, I suppose, was used commonly, just not in one-on-one situations. The Kusarigamas can be, I don't know if it would be Kusarigama or Kusarigamas, like, okay, sorry about that. My microphone got disconnected. Anyways, where was I? I don't know. I started talking about this. Anyways, the well, again, another very devastating close quarters weapon. I think that in long range it could start to become a bit of an issue, especially if you're fighting somebody with like a spear or something like that. Especially since, with a sword you might be able to block it with the outside ends of these. You would never want to use the inside, because, they could just slide it down the hilt handle. Oh, hey, look at that. Anyways, just slide it right down the handle and hit your hand. But if you blocked with the outside at the same time, I think it'd be pretty easy to break through, or at least roll down the end and hit your feet or legs or something like that. So that's a big issue with these, is there is very, very little, if any, defensive capability whatsoever of this kind of weapon. That being said, if you could get close enough to somebody and get one good hit in, you've got this entire spike impaled, and you can drag them around anywhere. And not to mention, if you get that much metal into somebody and pull it out, they're probably going to bleed to death. Long range, like I said, as far as the skill goes, it could be really effective. Long range weapons, long range melee, I guess you could say, like this could be used pretty effectively, where if you spun the chain around it to gain momentum and throw it at somebody, if it hits them hard enough, or if you can hook it onto them, then you've got control over them, and they're confused about what's going on. However, there is, of course, the issue that it doesn't work, or they grab it and pull you down, like can happen in the game. And if they pull you down from that and then they hit you on the ground, you're probably dead again. Especially seeing as the Shinobi's armor is almost non-existent. But again, like I said, if you can hit somebody and get them hooked with an end of this, or impale it into them, then you can deal quite a bit of damage. Not to mention, if you're good at using that chain, you can wrap it around them, or wrap it around a limb, or their weapon or something. So that's why I think that the Shinobi is third tier, C tier. And it wouldn't even be third tier, it would be fourth. So there he goes. Okay, next up we have the Shugoki. Let's see, there he is. So the Shugoki uses a club called the Kanabo, or I think it's called the Kanabo. Anyways, sorry, I'm not entirely certain on a lot of these. I should have written them down. But anyways, the Shugoki's club basically is sort of like the Warden's longsword in the way that it's long enough that you could definitely use it as a substitute for a shield, and if you hit somebody with it, it's a hard hit. However, unlike the Warden, you can't, you know, you can't amputate or decapitate somebody with a club, while you can with a sword. You can't stab with a club. So you have to hit pretty hard with something like this. And not to mention, this would only be effective against certain kinds of armor like chainmail or like leather armor. I mean, if it's like splint mail or like plate mail, it's not gonna do a huge amount. Um, so because of its heavy effectivity, if you hit somebody in the right place really hard, and minor defensive capabilities, it's really not a very effective weapon if you're up against somebody who's wearing a specific kind of armor, or just somebody who's fast enough to dodge a weapon at this size. So yeah. So there he goes into C. Anyways, next we have the Tiandi. So let's see. Whoops, I don't know why I'm going to executions. So the Tiandi's got a wonky looking sword called a Dao. So as you can see, it's a very wide sword, but sort of like a katana, it's very, very thin. And in fact, the Tiandi even has an emote where he hits it on the ground. In fact, here, I'll show you. Let's see. Where he hits it on the ground hard enough that he dents it and makes it so that it's not even straight anymore. So immediately you have that penalty with this kind of a sword of being really, really easy to break or bend. And so, that could definitely be an issue. And because of that, any kind of defensive capability that the wideness of it might give you is nulled pretty quickly. However, it's a big sword in how heavy you could hit into somebody. And because it's like a cleaver at the end, if you hit into somebody, sort of like the Shinobi's hooks, you can probably drive them around a little bit. And you can definitely make a larger wound than just a regular sword would. There was another point I was going to make. Let me think. Oh, yes, and of course the speed of it because of how thin it is. So I read a little bit about it, and it was primarily to just be extremely relentless, and so you could hit again and again and again and again and again. So sort of like the Orochi or the... I should really have turned those notifications off. Anyways, if you let up, just like I think that would happen if you were using a katana, if you let up, then that gives them a really good opening where you have very little defense. Not to mention a big difference between the Orochi and the Tiandi here is the Tiandi is wearing all metal armor. And so because of that, he would be slower, even though he's got probably a weapon just as fast as the katana. He'd move slower because of his armor, and would not have an easier time dodging. And because of that, I think the Tiandi is in C tier. So there he goes. All right, then. Next up, we have the Berserker. So, the Berserker, whose loadout I forgot to change to the first one again, has two single-handed battle axes. So, the Berserker's method of combat is, kind of going off his name is Berserk. I mean, he just drives through pain, with that hyper armor, and he just lets his bloodlust take him through. And with, a good amount of strength to rip an axe out of somebody if it gets in, and of course the strength to actually hit somebody with an axe, and even if you miss, just swing again and again and again, he's really effective and really scary, to be honest. If you were, say, like, the Warden or the Nabooshe, somebody without an actual shield, it could be difficult to withstand the amount of blows that he can dish out at once. Especially if he hits you even once with something like this, it could damage you badly, and maybe even put you into a state of recovery long enough that he could just hit you again. So while that is true, that only works if he actually is, berserk. And in that state, if somebody hits him, he that can be pretty devastating to him, especially considering the only armor that he really has is around his body, which is chainmail. Not even his body, just his torso, not even his arms or his legs. And he's not wearing a helmet, which is another ridiculous thing in this game, to be quite honest. But like I said, I'm focusing mostly on the weapons here. So, and not to mention, if somebody does start to attack him first or during his attacks, 2 single-handed battle axes are not going to be the best for any method of defense. I mean, if somebody tries to attack him, he's pretty much screwed in the way of defense. So while he can be unstoppable if he just keeps going and going and going, the minute somebody has enough courage to attack back, it's not good for him. So he will be the next for C tier. All right. Next up, we have the YongJoon. So the YongJoon is basically, his weapon is almost exactly the same as the Tiandi's, in the way that it is the Tiandi's weapon except on a staff instead of a handle, and it's even where the Tiandi's sword is called a Dao, the YongJoon's is called a Guandao, which I would imagine is probably just pull sword or like large sword, or a large version of the Dao. But anyways, I don't know that. I'm just speculating. But anyways, in the same way that the Tiandi's sword is very flailing and, thin, it's the same thing with the YongJoon. So it's easy for his glaive thing here, his Guandao, to get bent. However, he has, first of all, a much longer handle, and because of that, he can hit so much harder. However, because of the handle, he's also a lot slower. Also, I suppose his age, but we're not really going into that. I'm just focusing on the weapons. So he is slower, but he can hit tremendously harder, especially with how thin the weapon is, because while it's a really thin blade, in this specific circumstance, it doesn't help so much with the speed because of how big the weapon is, but mostly with just how easy you could cut right through like leather armor or splint mail, and definitely flesh and bone. Not to mention the staff actually gives somewhat of a defensive capability, sort of like the Nabooshe or the Warden. And there's a neat little spike on the end for some reason. I don't know when you would ever use that, but that's so yeah, that's why I think that the YongJoon would be C tier. Because while it is similar to the Warden, it's just so easy to break that weapon. And, like I said, also just a lack of defensive capability. I mean, not a lack of it, I suppose, but a very small amount. Next in C tier is the Raider. So I'm gonna pretend I don't have this head because it's stupid. I mean, as far as effectivity goes, I mean something like this would make a lot more sense. but I just thought this looked cool, and it doesn't actually affect gameplay or damage output whatsoever. Obviously, though, I wouldn't have a head, nor would anybody have a head like that in real life. Anyways, in fact, it's so ridiculous that I'm just going to change it to this one for the sake of this. So, this right off the bat will make excuse me, will make me sneeze. Must be the rust on the end. Anyway, I don't think rust actually would make you sneeze. I don't know why I said that. Anyways, right off the bat, just like the Warden, the Nabooshe, and the YongJoon, this has their same defensive capabilities where you could block with the handle, which again, not nearly as good as an actual shield would be, but it still serves somewhat of a purpose. So similarly to the Warden, and kind of a mix between the Warden and the Berserker, he can swing this weapon around really fast for the size of it. I mean, not nearly as fast as something like a katana or like, those glaives they're not glaives, but hooks that the Shinobi has, but definitely fast for its size. Faster than a longsword. And another thing too is with an axe, because all of the weight is put right into the end of it, whereas a sword, it sort of spreads out through it, and since the sword gets smaller the farther down you go you could just delete somebody with a good hit from something like this. I mean, you could rip right through their skull or their neck, or wherever you're aiming. So, and a two-handed axe, again, like the Berserker, has a good chance of getting stuck if you don't go all the way through somebody. Which I suppose you could argue could be good in a one-on-one situation because it would damage them more. But if you are fighting multiple people, getting your weapon stuck is a really bad thing. And so because of its absolutely devastating potential, and because of the speed for the weapon it is, I am putting it at I would put it at B, but just because it's so viable to get stuck, or for you to miss, in fact, because if you hit somebody with the handle of it, I mean, it's a lot easier to dodge than a sword because there's so much less to dodge. But if you hit somebody with a handle, it's just like hitting somebody with a stick. I mean, it's going to hurt, but it's not going to take their head off or something. Also, not very good defensive capabilities. So, let's see. There's the Raider. So I'll stick him right there. All right. Next up, we have the Gladiator. So, the Gladiator's weapons were weapons that weren't really ever used in combat other than in, gladiator situations. I mean, the buckler was, but not really the trident. I was really tempted to put him in D tier because of the trident, or in this case, I suppose a septident. This has 7 spikes on it, but the buckler I changed my decision because of the buckler, which is the kind of shield that is, by the way. So, while the trident can be, sort of like the Raider's axe can be really devastating if you hit somebody, it's really only devastating if you hit somebody. Because, I mean, when you think about a spear, right, and you think about the entire thing being level, maybe a little bit heavier on the end. With a trident or a septident like this, it's way heavier on one end than the other. And if you're not using 2 hands with it, I mean, you're gonna be attacking pretty slow for a pretty low damage output. Not to mention, something with so many spikes is so easy to get a sword caught in to just twist out of their hands or to just shove back at them. However, because they do indeed have this buckler, they could use that to block a few incoming attacks, or even their their trident coming back at them. And because it's a buckler, they can have that on one hand and still use that same hand that has the buckler in it. They can still use that with the trident, so you can still use two hands and have a shield at the same time. And because that is definitely a versatile way of going about things, that's it just barely makes C tier. So that's pretty much it. Let's see, where is he? I cannot find him. There he is. Bop. Oh, running out of room for real this time. Okay, there's one more in C tier. C tier is a big one, so let's everybody gather together. Let's see. All right. So there's the gladiator. Oh wow, we all right, let's see if we can move everybody over basically touching, cuz we are going to need all the room that we can get to fit yet another person in seat here. I'll figure it out when we get there. Anyways, the last and final of C tier is the Peacekeeper. So the Peacekeeper has a short sword and a dagger. So right off the bat, I have to say that this is a really dumb choice when you could have changed that dagger out for a shield. I mean, plenty of people had knives or daggers as a sidearm with a shield and a sword as their primary weapons. But she doesn't. So the benefits of having a dagger as well as that sword is mostly with feinting. You can feint attacks with a sword and go in with a dagger, or vice versa, and you can really mess somebody up like that. Something else is if you attack enough times with the dagger and then switch over to the sword, they might not quite take into consideration how long the sword is compared to the dagger, and maybe you can get them like that. Another thing is, I suppose, is if you slash at somebody with the sword, then they might take, and considering how fast you can attack with a dagger, it might be enough shock to them that you can come in and hit them a second time with the dagger. Which I think is part of the reason why in the actual game, if you hit somebody with the sword, with a heavy attack anyways, then you can get a free light hit with a dagger. But because of the almost non-existent defensive capabilities with these weapons, maybe with the guard of the short sword, but and then making a cross with the guard of the short sword and the tiny guard of the dagger, using the blade of the dagger even, you might be able to stop a one-handed sword or something like that. But I mean, something like a spear or an axe comes at you, or a club especially, I mean, there's no defending against that with weapons like these. So while it does definitely have a lot of versatility, and because of how small the weapons are, a lot of speed, I mean, unless you're fighting somebody with a one-handed sword, you're probably doomed. And if you're fighting somebody with a one-handed sword, they probably will have a shield. So, Peacekeeper's not the best as far as realism goes. But, let's see. Can I fit you there? Somewhat. Yeah, that'll do. That's good enough. Yeah. All right. Okay, I'm going to move everybody over one more time. Make a neat little fade between all the backgrounds. Yeah, there we go. All right, cool. Now on to the final tier, which is D, which, so while C was basically, unless you're extremely skilled at the weapons that you're using, you're most likely gonna die. or you're fighting an opponent and where the weapon that you have is perfect for fighting against the kind that they have or the armor that they have, you're it's looking bad for you. D tier is you unless you have a huge streak of luck or you're some kind of god, you're gonna lose. I mean, there's no hope for you at this point. Um, I mean, not to say that you can't be skilled enough or that you won't be lucky enough, but you probably won't. So, first in D tier is the Shaman. So, the Shaman's weapons, if you can call them that even, are a hatchet and a knife. So, this hatchet looks like something, besides the spike at the end of it there, it, it really looks like something that you would use to just chop wood, like to split logs. And this just looks like a hunting knife that you would use to scrape fat off of a hide, to tan a hide. That's what it looks like. In fact, it looks like a hide tanning knife, or something that you would gut a animal with, which I suppose is part of the character for her. But I mean, when you go up against somebody who's coming at you with even the Peacekeeper with just a short sword, how are you going to block that with a hatchet? How are you not going to get hit with that with a knife? I mean, you could dodge it obviously, but if you need to block something, it's not going to work. Not to mention, what an unwieldy pair of weapons. I mean, because in the one hands you have something, you've got the hatchet, which is, I mean, you could definitely hurt somebody with that, but it's not as long as the Berserker. It's not nearly long enough to actually deal any lethal damage in a single hit. But it's also an axe, so it can get stuck really easily, and it's not even, it's got most of the weight on one end, so it's not particularly fast. And not to mention, in the other hand, you've got a hunting knife, or a tanner. And with a barely weapon like that, stabbing will never be the best option, but it's so short that you would never be able to use it to slash unless somebody was dying on the ground already. Not to mention, with two weapons like this, one, it's so unbalanced and in weight. You would have such a difficult time, since one you can only use for chopping, and the other you would only be able to effectively use it for stabbing, but since it's a dagger, you can't really even use it for that. I mean, not a dagger. Since it's a knife, just a hunting knife, you can barely even use it for that. To me, the Shaman really just seems like she picked up some tools and went to war and expected to make it back alive. But that's just as far as realism and weapons go. Obviously, she's got some, magical capabilities, and such. So, yeah. Also, her armor is ridiculous, if you can even call it that. Like, what is this? A miniskirt made out of hide and no helmet on a bald head? That's smart. You'll survive that. Anyway, let's see. So, that's the Shaman for D tier. Where did you go? Why did you go all the way down there? Hold on. I got some formatting issues here. Be with you in a moment. Okay. So, anyways. What? Where did the Shaman go? That's the Shinobi. Oh, there's the Shaman. I need the Shaman to be at the top so that I can actually see it above the Nabooshe when I put a new one on. Anyways, next in D tier we have the Shaolin. So, the Shaolin's weapon is a bow staff with metal ends. I think that pretty much speaks for itself, but in case it doesn't, a bow staff is not going to do anything to plate armor or split mail or scale mail. I mean, the best you could hope for is that they have leather armor or chainmail and that you hit them hard enough to break a bone or fracture a bone or something. I have done. I used to be in a class for uh, martial arts. That was it was a South Korean martial art, Tang Sudo. But and so I have used bow staffs before, and they're, you can spin them around fast, but it's they're heavier than they look, definitely. And and I've also used not used, but like held, swords before, and so I have a good gauge, and axes. I've held a one-handed battle axe before too. So I think I've got a pretty good gauge on how much. I have also held a katana as well, so I've got a good gauge on how much each of these weapons weigh. I haven't held a real shield before, so I don't really know about that, but I can safely say that a bow staff with metal ends would weigh about as much as the Warden's longsword. And I mean, because I've held a longsword before, and I've held a bow staff before, and the bow staff, even without the metal ends, was heavy as hell. There are bow staffs that have sloped ends that are way easier to move around, but they're pretty much used for practicing. And these have metal ends. I can't stress that enough. So, first of all, the weight. This is basically a double-ended club, the way that this has been designed. And while you could definitely fight somebody effectively with a kind of weapon like this who didn't have any armor, and only had a bow staff themselves, if they have a sword, they block you once and then they turn around and cut your throat. Because what are you gonna do? I mean, you could block it with this, I suppose, but you can't block forever. They're gonna keep attacking you. And again, if they have a sword, they probably have a shield to go along with it. A bow staff is not getting through a shield. I mean, unless it's a completely leather shield, you can't do it. Not to mention, I mean, I can't stress this enough. The weight. It would take you too long to swing it for you to even deal any real damage, because they would just dodge it or block it. And even if you did hit them, what is that? Blunt weapon on whatever armor that they have. You better hope that their armor isn't even good enough to withstand a blow from a bow staff, because otherwise it's not even going to do anything but, shake them up maybe. The only other club in the game is or clubs, I suppose, blunt weapons, are the Shigoki's Kabano or Kanabo. Let me see. I'm going to check real quick because I want to be sure about this. Or Kanabo, yeah. So the Shigoki's Kanabo, or the Conqueror's flail. And I mean, the Conqueror right off the bat has spikes, so that's a big one. Not to mention, he's got a chain with it, so it can wrap around shields or other weapons, and it can build up momentum without him having to swing his arm around. He can just swing his wrist, and the chain will do the work for him. Even in C tier, the Shigoki's Kanabo is better, because it's way longer, it has an actual handle, and so its weight is oriented at the end of the weapon instead of like slightly at the ends like this bow staff is. And I mean, it also has spikes. So yeah. And comparing it to the Shigoki, since it is a relatively similar style of fighting, at least the Shigoki has some wood plates and like metal shoulder pads. And yeah, I mean, what does this guy have? He has robes and this big hunk of metal in front of his stomach, and metal bracer. Oh my god, excuse me, metal bracers. But okay, I mean, aside from the tier list, I'm going on a short complaint here. That's something that pisses me off. Is his parrying with a metal bracer or blocking everything. Like honestly, he can parry a longsword coming from the like an overhand strike with a longsword. He can parry with a wrist. No. I mean, even if you hit somebody who's wearing, You know, that's something that I think a lot of people don't recognize is that if you hit somebody with a sword and it doesn't break through the armor, the energy of the force of the impact still goes through the armor. I mean, you know, you hit somebody with the sharp side of a sword who's wearing chainmail, it might not cut them or cut into them, but it could break a rib or something. And so the fact that the Shaolin can block stuff with his bracer is just ridiculous to me. But anyways, mostly because of his bow staff, because that's the kind of tier list I'm doing. Shit, my whole keyboard just reset. I'm having a lot of issues with my computer today. Anyways, so that's why I think he's in D tier. Next up, we have the Lawbringer. And I'm sure that if you play the game, this is not going to be your favorite decision that I've made. However, the Lawbringer uses a poleaxe, a halberd-esque poleaxe. And while I think his armor would account for a lot of how good of a fighter he is in a 1v1 situation, how would he ever hit somebody with this weapon? It is massive. It has metal on the bottom, in the middle, and a huge amount of it as, first of all, the guard, second of all, the spear at the end, third of all, the axe thing, like the spike on the back of it, and fourth of all, the actual axe head. It is really heavy. One of these, like a poleaxe. I mean, a halberd, I could understand a little bit more, but this is, I mean, you know, in real life, what anybody who used a poleaxe like this or a halberd was surrounded by footmen with, you guessed it, swords and shields. And what they would do is they would open up an area so that whoever had this massive weapon could get one huge swing in and maybe end somebody or maybe multiple people right there and then. And then they would close up while he recovered, lifted the weapon up again for another swing. In a 1v1 situation, this isn't going to work. It's so slow. I mean, the best bet you would have is to try to stick him a few times with a spear end, but because of how massive it is and how much weight is on one end of it, it would be hard to even do that. Not to mention, if you were just stabbing at them with a weapon like this, you could probably pretty easily just run around them and hit their leg or something like that. I mean, and God forbid you ever try to use the axe head. Because if you try to go for a full swing of that, it's going to take you long enough to recover that they could probably just knock you over. Especially with all this, this plate armor he's wearing. And if you get knocked over, that's another situation where that's probably it. So, yeah. That's it for Lawbringer. Oh, wait, I put Lawbringer in before that. And last, and potentially least, we have the Highlander, who I guess I'll just put in there as well. So the Highlander's sword, for almost entirely the same reasons as the Lawbringer, is terrible for 1v1 situations. It's a claymore, first of all, so already, just like the Lawbringer, you have this sheer, absolutely fucking massive amount of weight that you swing and that carries you. I mean, look at this guy. This guy looks like he could rip a tree out of the ground with his bare hands. And even in the game, when he swings it, he moves around with the force that this weapon uses. Granted, you could cut somebody right in half with a weapon like this if you got a heavy enough, accurate enough hits. But, I mean, that's just it, I mean, if you hit them. Just like the Lawbringer with his poleaxe, exactly what would happen is somebody with a weapon of this size, unless they were unstoppably good and ridiculously strong too, is they would be surrounded by footmen, and they would open up for him to have one giant swing, and then while he recovered and lifted the weapon back up for another swing, looked for an opportunity, they would close back up around him. So, that's not to mention. I guess I didn't. Okay, I'll explain the Lawbringer too with the defensive capabilities since they're pretty much the same on both of these. Yes, you can block just as easily as the Warden or the Nabooshe or the Shaolin even, but like I also said, you can't defend forever. You can't only block. I mean, you can block over and over and over and over again, but if you never get a hit in, they will eventually get you. They will eventually find an opening. And I'm tempted to even put the Highlander in like an E or F tier, because at least the Lawbringer, at least the Lawbringer has a spear like spike on the tip of his weapon. At least the Shaolin's bow staff isn't as heavy as a claymore. At least the Shaman has the speed and capability of dodging and tearing somebody up if she's close enough to them. But the Highlander, man, I mean, he has the hope that he has a good hit or two and he's good to go. But that's it. I mean, it would not be a good weapon to be stuck in one-on-one combat with. So yeah, that was the tier list. So these are the final results. Oops. So actually, I have a better idea. Let's export this and say realistic weapons tier list. And from there, boop-a-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. There we go. Now it's a better size. Anyway, as you can see, we've got Warlord, Prior, and Valkyrie at the top in S tier, mostly because of their shields and how fast and versatile, not versatile necessarily, the versatility of their shields, but also the fact that they have shields, and their weapons are extremely simple and easy to use. Compared to these other ones. In A tier, we've got Conqueror, Orochi, and Aramusha, mostly because they have a little bit of defensive capability left. All right, well, not a little bit, I suppose. Enough that they could survive for a while, and enough attacking potential that they can still deal a bit of damage without... But, I mean, at the same time, it requires a lot more skill than something like the top three have. B and C were basically almost there. Well, B was like almost there, but not quite, because you were so close to having a viable set of weapons, but you just barely missed it. C tier, I mean, you're close to destroyed at this point. Unless you're a legend with the weapons that you're using, you're not going to be able to deal a whole lot of damage. Or if you're really lucky in who you're fighting. D tier, unless you have a huge streak of luck or you're some sort of god at fighting, it's not going to work. I think as far as improving B and C, I think I'll do like a little bit of how I would improve the character as far as realism goes. I'm not even going to focus on D because it just wouldn't work. So with a Centurion, all you need to do is give him a shield. Give him like a buckler even, like the Gladiator has, and he'd be good to go, I'd say. Or, maybe even a round shield, and it would be good. With the Warden, again, I think a shield would really come in handy. I think something that would help him a bit would be to have a kite shield like the Blackfriar has, because he could, you know, it would be really difficult for him to hit people, though. While he would be almost unstoppable at that point as far as being able to get hits, it would be really hard for him to hit somebody. And I worry that that might just leave him at B. So Warden's, I think, might be good as how he is. Potentially better if he had a shield. Or, maybe a smaller sword or something like that. Nabooshe, again, not a character I think could have a whole lot of improvements because the Nagita doesn't really work with a shield. Or I don't think it would, anyways. So maybe if she had, like, throwing knives or kunai or something, like a lot of them, or like darts or a hand crossbow or something like that, then she could use that and then go in with a spear or vice versa. But it just wouldn't work super well. The new Shia, I think that as long as she had a shield, again, a shield, she'd be good to go. I mean, you could even have both of the hook weapons, like maybe attach one of the hook spears, or attach both of the hook spears to the shield, or gosh, I'm getting really into this now, but like have something sort of like a buckler, like with the gladiator, but attach one of the hook swords to the other end, so you hold it sort of like you would claws or a guitar or like brass knuckles, and that way you have a lot more defense. The Kensei, just like the Warden, his flaws match his pros. His cons match his pros, so I really don't think there's a huge amount that you could do to make him any better. The Hidakiri, I'm going with it again. I would say a shield would be probably pretty good. Take one of the heads off of his axe and just make it single-headed, like it is in real life, I suppose, and give him a shield and you're good to go. Shinobi, I don't. I mean, he is lacking. All he's really lacking in is defensive capability. It's just, how would you even give him a defensive capability without ripping his versatility and, physical impact away from him? So I don't really think he is fixable much. The Shigoki with the Kabano, I think he could definitely use a shield, like a great shield, with like maybe a smaller Kabano, or is it Kanabo or Kabano? Oh, it's Kanabo. Well, damn. Anyway, yeah, I mean, if he had like a great shield, he's big enough to use it, and like maybe a smaller club, I think that would be perfect for him. The Tiandi, it's another one, just like the Warden and the Kensei, where it's like really hard to fix because he's not terrible. I mean, all I would say is change his sword to a katana, but that kind of just changes his entire fighting style. So I don't know for him. Berserker, just give him a round shield. I mean, there are just like with swords and shields, there are plenty of people who went into battle with a round shield and a one-handed axe. That wasn't an uncommon thing, and he'd be way more protected with that. Plus, you can use a round shield pretty offensively, so his whole berserk thing wouldn't really change much. The YongJoon, I hate to do this yet again, but just like the few others that I've mentioned, his whole character kind of changes if I try to add anything else, because I can't add anything because of the size of his weapon. But if I take the weapon away, his whole fighting style changes. So, and again with the Raider, that same explanation. The Gladiator, I would say, change the trident to a spear like the Valkyrie has, and I mean, already you've got a vastly more viable character. But I mean, even if you kept the trident, you could maybe give him a net or something like that. Lots of gladiators had nets. I mean, if you could capture somebody in a net and then just stab them to death constantly over and over again with something as heavy as a trident, because a spear doesn't have quite the impact. You can impale somebody on a spear, but it's harder to do. Whereas with a trident, you can just go over and over and over again if they're vulnerable. So all I would say for the gladiator is if he has something that can give a bit of vulnerability to somebody, then he's definitely a lot more viable. And with the Peacekeeper, take away the dagger, give her a sword. I mean, give her a... Not even take away the dagger, just have it as an offhand weapon, like sheathed, and give her a small shield. And you're good to go. So, yeah. This was longer than I expected it to be, but, yeah, so that's that. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe to join the Chorus Rebellion. If you have any suggestions for games for me to play or ways to make my commentating more enjoyable, don't hesitate to leave a comment. That's about it. See ya. So I started editing the video. It is longer than I expected, even more so than I said at the end of the video. An hour and 20 minutes? Holy fuck. I thought it was more like... I expected this video to take maybe 20 minutes. At the end of the video, I thought it was maybe 40, 45, but wow. Thanks for sticking through all the way if you did.